We're ready to get started. Good to see everybody here at the town hall. And just for quick background, we're DK and Mishti from the Highlighter team, and we're building Highlighter as a place to gather to read and discuss great writing. And these town halls are a way to bring writers into the mix to dig deeper on their ideas with readers. And today we're springboarding our discussion off of Scott Belsky's book, The Messy Middle, and we'll post a link to that in chat so you can buy it off Amazon if you haven't already.
Yeah, we're pumped for this discussion. This has been a really followed book on Highlighter. I think from the beginning, I was browsing people's highlights from like a year ago. They were really interesting. And I know we have an audience of creative people here, founders, investors, operators. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Scott's work, not only from the writing, but also like living it yourself. So I do hope you all chime in with your own perspectives and questions too.
Now, these town halls are magical when they're super participatory. So we definitely have lots of questions. We could fill up an hour asking Scott our own questions, but we'll kick it off. But everybody here is welcome and encouraged to submit your own ideas in chat, and we'll welcome you up live to discuss with Scott. We are recording the session as we always do, and we're streaming it live to YouTube so that people who can't attend the session today can still learn from the conversation.
Yeah, and we like starting off with an intro from a community member who has a connection to our guest. And so I'm really excited to hand it off to Max, fellow Cornell alum who I think has actually met Scott maybe like a year ago, or I don't remember the story. But before I give it to Max, question for everyone in chat. Given your experiences, whether in the startup ecosystem or outside, what are your top questions for Scott? So I will hand it off to Max.
Thank you, Mishti. I'm so excited to welcome Scott Belsky to Highlighter. Today we will be discussing his book, The Messy Middle. Check it out on Amazon if you haven't already. It's really his second book after the bestseller, Making Ideas Happen. The Messy Middle draws on 5+ years of interviews with founders and executives about their middle journeys. Scott pulls from his experience as a founder of Behance, which was acquired by Adobe, and his role as an angel investor and advisor to many early stage companies that you may know today, such as Uber, Pinterest, Sweetgreen, and more. For me, this is a personal one as a fellow alumnus and one involved in the Cornell entrepreneurship ecosystem. Scott serves on the Advisory Council for Entrepreneurship at Cornell, where I helped lead eLab prior to graduating this year. Further, he MCs the Cornell Entrepreneurship Summit, which will be held next month. And we'll be sharing a stage with a former Highlighter guest, Paulina Marinova. So without further ado, Scott Belsky.
Thank you. Thanks, Max. And thanks everyone for taking the hour. I want to make it interesting and useful for you, and happy to riff on anything on your minds. You know, The Messy Middle is really about navigating volatility. It's about the realization that we're not our best selves at the lows when we make decisions out of fear and we freak out and we're overburdened by anxiety and uncertainty and ambiguity. And we're also not our best selves at the highs because we falsely attribute the things we did to the things that work. We start to get a little high on ourselves, so to speak. And that's when a lot of bad decisions are made too. So I didn't know, obviously, that this book a year later, we'd all be living amidst incredible amounts of volatility and uncertainty. And especially a lot of my friends and folks in my portfolio that are navigating businesses that have been especially affected by the pandemic. The conversations have taken unexpected turns for me as it relates to the messy middle. So anything that's on your minds, I'm happy to dive in.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great launching off point because, we often do ask authors, the book in this case, I think was published in 2018. And so a couple of years have gone by, a lot has changed. If you were to sort of update or write an appendix today, do you have sort of some specific kind of advice or issues you might want to address, whether it's around, COVID or, the rise of remote work or, the mission focused organizations or any of those things come to mind?
Well, I would say the one area that I have much more appreciation for and interest and curiosity about is the forcing function that a crisis serves as. And I do talk about that a little bit in the book, but every industry has been shown the future to some extent, or at least a future. And and where some will regress back to the way things were to some extent, and many will never do that. A big lesson that I learned over the last year is how much of all the new technology, all the new practices, all the new ways of working and doing things that all of us love. The fact is that even though those have existed in many cases for years, we've never fully benefited from those advancements because there have always been the holdouts, the people that we work with, the people amongst our customer base that were just kind of stubborn. And even though there was a better way to do things, like maybe it's whatever it is for you, like Slack versus email, or Trello versus this, or Airtable versus Excel, or whatever, when you have a few people that refuse to kind of jump that divide, you almost regress back to the mean, and you don't realize the benefits of all that new productivity that you have at your disposal. And I think this forcing function of the pandemic has accelerated the holdouts, jumping the gap. In some ways, we're finally now realizing the benefits of a lot of the stuff that's been at our fingertips for a while, but was never fully realized. So that's another aspect of the messy middle and the volatility and the forcing functions of adversity that didn't fully occur to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm actually curious to hear your perspective as an investor and also at Adobe. You've written about how creativity is sort of the new productivity, and like the importance of building and kind of enabling creative muscle. So how do you think about tools or basically like ways that remote work or some of the new things we're seeing around video play into that discussion?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, the fact that creativity as a skill set has always been confined to the art class is crazy. But it's very representative of the last, call it couple hundred of years, where people have excelled in their jobs for the most part based on their productivity. The more cars you produce, the more things you stamp, the more papers you process, the more productive you are, the more you get paid, the more you get recognized. And now, of course, we're at that moment where almost everything repetitive and mundane will be replaced by AI, and no longer are people succeeding in the workplace because of their productivity as much as their creativity. Increasingly, it's really about compelling stories that you're telling your colleagues to get them to change the way that we do something as a company. It's really about expression, and it's about ingenuity, and a lot of like Kai-Fu Lee, who wrote a book about AI, as AI and the impact of AI on society, basically concludes that creatives are maybe the only safe human jobs, actually, that everything else will be done by something else. And at the end of the day, it's the way our brain works in mysterious ways. It's the origins of, mistakes of the eye yields creativity, childhood trauma yields creativity, the weirdness in our brains, really. And you can't really replicate that as easily, I guess, in computers, at least not yet. And so that's what I mean by creativity is the new productivity. I believe that humans will stand out and succeed at school, on social media, building their brands, at work, through creativity more so than productivity in years past. And as it relates to then the tools themselves, I came into Adobe in 2012, late 2012, when they acquired my company. And all we had were very professional tools that the vast majority of folks who downloaded them weren't able to figure out how to use them. And yet here I am also saying that creativity is kind of the saving grace of humanity. So, what do we do about this? Well, we have to make creativity more accessible. We have to make new tools and new ways of doing things. We have to help people learn the professional tools, new ways of learning. And I could go on and on about the things we're doing to do that, but that's been the challenge. That's been the exciting challenge.
That's an interesting framing, because I hear a lot of people worried about AI and robots taking over, and I think the creativity message is an inspiring one that everybody can attach to and find a way to participate. But I don't hear enough people kind of with that framing as sort of that's really what we as humans are good at. So I wonder, are there areas that you've been kind of, beating the drum on this message? And do you feel like maybe internally at Adobe, or when you're working with a startup that you've angel invested in, do you sort of try to nurture or kind of draw that out from people explicitly?
Well, I am in on a few different fronts. I mean, the answer is yes, of course. I'm trying. I did a whole tour through Europe a couple of years ago in areas like Germany and the UK that are very concerned about the role of AI. And everyone thinks that AI is just a bad thing and it's going to disrupt everyone's careers. And, I tried to share some of the data. Actually, our customers can spend up to 50% of their time doing repetitive, mundane work that they hate. And they would rather be spending that time trying new ideas. If you're a designer, you spend all day masking something, or you can spend all day trying 5 different variations and getting your client's feedback and then choosing the one that's best. And of course, the latter will always yield the better outcome if you can have the time focused on the ingenuity side of creativity. So AI is an unlock of creativity as far as I'm concerned, and of human potential, if you look at it that way. I also think that within our teams, it's really hard to help people understand the ramifications for AI as it relates to how you even create in the first place. Should you start with a blank page ever again, or should you always start with some pieces of content, something that's being recommended to you? And there's a huge, some people feel like it's infringing on them, and some people feel like it's super empowering for them to start with content as opposed to start with nothing. So, and AI has a big part of that because it deduces what content you should start with. So, on the investing front, I need a lot of teams, obviously, that talk about the benefits of AI. Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
And the question always, of course, is the data set sufficient? Is there enough data there to really build the right models and allow the machine learning to be successful? And the answer is usually no, because they're startups. And if they do have all that data, you have to ask them where they got it. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, especially as it relates to helping clean data, and make sure that it's able to be used in a productive way for AI, that sort of thing.
Yeah, switching gears a bit, I want to turn it to Daniel, who had a good question about sort of your career path in general. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Scott, thank you so much for joining the call, for leading the call. I had a question about earlier on in your career before you started Behance. What were your greatest fears in leaving Goldman to start a company back in 2006?
It's a good question, because when I look back and remember my hesitation leaving the cocoon of a big company like Goldman, which at the time, finance was the way you got started in business, and I had a promising career there. And I remember being so concerned and worried and second guessing myself. And now I'm like, of course, my goodness, I'm so glad that I got out there and started to pursue my own ideas and give it a chance. And the honest truth is that I actually hedged myself. I wasn't so sure that Behance would succeed, obviously. Whenever I told people that I was trying to build a company that would organize the creative world, they were like, good luck with that. When we had some small focus groups with creatives, they were like, listen, we've got MySpace, we've got DeviantArt, I got Facebook. Like, I don't know what you're doing here. I don't know if I need this. And we had a conviction, but it wasn't necessarily clear. And so when I was at Goldman, I was already brewing the idea of Behance, but I applied to business school. I applied to business school in some ways as an excuse to explain to myself and others as to why I would leave this job that I had, this secure job, and also to give me 6 months of time to see if I could actually get something off the ground. And so that was my hedge. And I went in all in that 6 months when people were like, oh, you're going to go travel India and you're going to go explore the world before business school. I'm like, no. I'm going to try to start a business so I don't have to go to business school. And I actually parallel processed it. And it was probably one of the worst MBA students in my class, because I was just focused on the business and my team. But I look back on that and I wonder, did that handicap me? Is it more of a enviable thing for an entrepreneur to go all in and decide that I'm not going to do anything else, I'm going to put everything on the line? But I've also had debates with friends in business who say that they actually think one of the most important things for successful entrepreneurs is knowing how to manage risk. And so then there's another part of me that says maybe this is the hedge that I was trying to leverage, that maybe from a good skill set as opposed to a bad one. I don't know, but that's my story. And I can't just say I jumped in with full conviction and it happened. It wasn't as simple as that.
I like those
Gotcha.
kind
Appreciate
of
the
organic. Yeah, I was gonna say I like those organic paths because I feel like, even whether you're explicitly managing personal risk or it just is implicit because your spidey sense tells you that you sort of want to pursue an idea, but you don't necessarily know to what extent you want to. I wonder sort of how that style of thinking may have applied to the creation of the book, The Messy Middle. So, some of the times we've met with authors and they tell us about a series of tweets or blog posts that eventually culminated in a book, or maybe it's a set of discussions with a certain thought partner. So we'd love to hear a bit more about the process of how the book came together and sort of what was the genesis of that?
Well, when I did Making Ideas Happen, I had no idea what I was doing, writing a book and how much work it would be. And I told myself after that, I am never doing this again. Mm-hmm. And so that, there was 7 years between these two books. What happened is that as soon as I published that book, I just always was in the motion at that point of capturing the gems that I would hear in meetings, on boards that I sat on, with entrepreneurs I was on the phone with at 1 a.m. discussing a difficult decision, and my own experiences. I just became somewhat obsessive in capturing these little nuggets that I didn't want to forget. I mean, it was a selfish thing. I just was like, wow, that's such a great way of looking at that. I want to remember that when I go through a difficult time like that myself. So it's one of those reflexes. And so this yielded an Evernote notebook of about 800 entries, and I called it Essential Realizations. And it was just things that I just wanted to realize and hold on to. And then it was once on a plane, maybe 5 years or 6 years into this, where I noticed that there were 800 or so, and I realized that would be really I had to do something to organize them. And so I started to tag them themes. And the themes that emerged were really 4 themes: the start of something, how to endure the lows, how to optimize the highs, and how to finish something, how to finish something without self-sabotage and other problems that creep up when you're shipping. And so those 4 themes became wow, there's something here. I ended up cutting all the ones in the start section because I figured there were enough entrepreneurship books out there about how to start something. And instead, I really, decided to aggregate those 3 other themes and realize that the common theme across all of them was volatility, endurance, and optimization. And so that was the culmination. And then I said, okay, I gotta do this one more time. I can't die with this on my laptop and no one else ever sees any of it.
Yeah, I'm talking about creativity and how it has integrated into your own routine, whether it's writing this book or otherwise. I'm kind of curious, you've written also about the importance of sort of cognitive transition and not just being on your video conference machine all day long, taking time to step away or introduce some variety into the tasks in your day. So what is your daily routine right now? What are your strategies for sort of integrating that fresh thinking into your day-to-day?
Well, that line of thinking is very top of mind for me right now, because I manage a very large organization of thousands of people, many of whom are saying that they're overwhelmed right now, despite the fact that they have no transit time to and from work. Despite the fact that there's no business travel or whatever else, we're all feeling very overwhelmed to some degree. And I've thought a lot about it because everyone's very understanding and there's flexibility, and yet people still feel exhausted. And of course, there's stressors in the world. But one of my theories is that it's the loss of the cognitive transition between everything in our lives. You used to walk between meetings, you used to walk down to get lunch and back up. You used to have to wait for the room to empty and then fill up again. And those transitions were a forced kind of palate cleanser, if you will. There was something very important about them. It was also a source of spontaneity. It was a source of, after a difficult conversation, going up to someone and making a joke, and saying, all good, and all those things that used to happen in the seams that we took for granted are gone. And now we're living the result of just all of it stripped away. And I think that is the suffering that we're enduring during the workday. And so I actually am interested in, obviously technological solutions for that, and also practice solutions. So for me, I'm trying to save the mornings more proactively, as opposed to putting every call in every 30-minute slot. Obviously, always trying to say no more often. And then also I'm encouraging the teams to hold some periods, some blocks where there is just no meetings anywhere. So no one feels like they're being impolite or not accommodating somebody else, but there's literally a lack of focus for everyone in the entire organization. And we've also given some people, some teams mandated days off, just like Friday, shutdown, no meetings, no work. So I think that it's a bit of a new playbook for how to manage that.
Cool, thanks for that. I'm going to transition to Siddhesh, who has a question about sort of addressing elephants, which you don't have the authority.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Scott, regarding your action-driven to-do list on elephants in the room, what made you create such a detailed system, and any challenges you have faced when you are addressing the elephants in the room, for which we don't often have the authority to solve, like in early stages of the career or just joining company like that?
Well, I have my handy little sticker here. This is the no elephant sticker that I usually put up in my conference rooms and offices, because it's no offense to elephants, but the idea is that I believe that one of the greatest challenges of any successfully larger or successful company is the accumulation of what I like to call organizational debt. And organizational debt is the accumulation of decisions that should have been made but weren't, and the weights that all of us are carrying around that no one wants to talk about. And collectively, this creates a cognitive load that interferes with alignment and execution and productivity and happiness. So we have to surface these things. And I think a couple things you need to do, starting with the elephants, is have a culture where people start with them as opposed to hide them or end with them. I hate when decks end with risks and dependencies as opposed to starting with risks and dependencies. If you're relying on a vision in an update meeting, let's talk about the things that are getting in the way of you achieving that vision, as opposed to all the good kumbaya stuff and progress, and end with, oh, by the way, these are the things that might get in the way of us executing. Also, when you're going to a big meeting with people and there's different organizations present with different obstacles for each other, can you have a culture where people speak up and there's nothing sacred? It's no offense, I'm not critiquing your job, but you're not giving me this on time, and so I'm not going to be able to ship. How can you have a culture where that's okay? So I think having a no elephant rule is really important. A lot of this, of course, also goes back to the leader. And the greatest way of eliminating organizational debt, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, is decisiveness. And I share the story of Ken Chenault at American Express, former CEO there, who said, that the greatest thing he did in his career was making his bosses make decisions. Because by making decisions, you're always moving the ball forward. Even if it's the wrong decision, you gain data and learning that knows which way to go next. The other thing that's really cool about decisiveness is that luck favors the decisive. When you are decisive, people rally around you. They give you energy. They do extra work because they know exactly where they're headed. And so we need luck in all of these journeys we're on. And therefore, do yourself a favor and be as decisive as possible. And maybe even a little less sure of the decision, just so you can keep moving the ball forward.
Yeah, I think actually an interesting component of Siddhesh's question was kind of as a junior person in an organization, a lot of this advice is best executed perhaps by founders or executives. But as someone without, or in a position without as much power, thinking about how to improve communication within your organization or decision making or any of these things that you touch on, do you have any tactical advice on how to maneuver those kinds of situations?
Yeah, and also we should talk about being a junior person organization in these days, which is even a totally different puzzle. But generally speaking, everyone, unless if you're in a culture where you're not allowed to ask questions, then you should get the hell out, right? Hopefully, every culture is inviting of people asking questions, expressing curiosity, wanting to understand. Everyone knows, right? Any question you ask, there's usually someone else in the room who has that exact same question or should, and just doesn't know it. So that I learned through questions. Whenever I'm in a situation or an organization over my career where I have not been the authority or have no idea what I'm talking about, I figure it out through asking questions. And so that's it sounds like a very obvious piece of advice, but these days, what's interesting is that a lot of us who have established networks in our companies, or our senior leaders who've been there for years, we're just coasting off of those relationships and the credibility and the trust that we've had over the years to get through this period of complete remote work. But I am trying to also be empathetic to those who've joined us during the pandemic, who've literally never met a physical person, has never had any spontaneous conversation with anyone, never had lunch, never had drinks, never had laughter, outside of the working hours of a meeting. And for those people to build their network and to be impactful, it's a totally different talent on both the junior person side as well as the manager's side. You have to bake in spontaneity. You have to proactively do things that you used to expect would happen naturally. And I think that's the area we all have to be more thoughtful.
Great. I want to transition. I know George Zhang is a regular attendee and always has good questions, and he's got one in the chat. So come on up, George.
Hey, George.
Hey, Scott. Great to have you in. I'm also an ex-Goldman, ex-MBA in the entrepreneurial world. So
right.
Good to meet another person with the same kind of or similar kind of background.
Likewise.
One of the things I'm super enamored about is like this process of thinking through both the North Star and the process like entrepreneurs or product folks go through to hit product market fit. And I kind of see your book, The Messy Middle, as like a great guidebook, like a handbook of a lot of different sort of tactical nuggets of wisdom through that, essentially finding product market fit, scaling, and then through the exit type process. But one of the things I think a lot about is like, do you have like a process for both the North Star and the specific tactical steps you use to get to product market fit? The ones that exist tend to be super general, like Paul Graham's whole like make something people want. Mark Andreessen's like you hit product market fit when you can't add servers fast enough, or Andy Ratcliffe has some really thoughtful ones around sales yield, around like word of mouth, NPS scores, about pulling contract orders or trial orders. And then the one other one I've seen has been Rahul Vora and his whole product market fit machine, where he optimizes for people who would be very disappointed if they don't get access to your product. But when you're going through that messy middle, navigating that process, how do you think about that, both that North Star and the tactical steps to navigate that?
Well, listen, I like Rahul's approach of asking people how disappointed they'd be. That's a classic metric now that I don't know if he came up with it, but there are a lot of folks who use that with their customers now, and that's really valuable. The thing that gets me most excited is when customers start to complain about things that you want them to complain about, as opposed to things you don't want them to complain about. So, well, first of all, most customers don't complain at all because they just don't care, and that's not product market fit. When customers care enough to want to try to make your product work for them because they know you personally or because it promises a solve to a problem that they have, and they're coming to you with complaints for why they cannot use it, you have not achieved product market fit, obviously. And that's a bad sign. You have to figure out what to rethink there. But when customers start to tell you, oh my gosh, now if you just had the ability to sync with this thing, or okay, so I'm using it all day for this, and now, but I still have to switch to this product to do that. If you could just bring that feature in, I wouldn't have to go to that product anymore. I mean, in my experience, those are the types of requests or complaints that are the greatest signal that this is like really, really working. And that's actually why whenever I advise teams on their V1 kind of spec or their MVP, if you will, I always encourage them to optimize for the problems they want to have, meaning the latter type of question, and not the problem, and make sure that they include the MVP, for MVP, the things that they don't want to have. So, not getting through the funnel, not being able to sign up, not being able to send invites to all of your team, not being able to this or that. Those are all those are slam doors shut right at the onset when you need as many open doors as possible. And I like teams that over-index and spend extra time baking and even pushing off their MVP launch to achieve those things. But what's interesting is that actually a lot of teams get more excited about incorporating the ladder camp in their V1, which is a bad idea. All these premium features, or, well, this is a premium feature and we'll get people to upgrade and that will be our business model and we have to launch with that in order to validate our business model. Wrong. If you have customers using your product wildly and for free, you can build a business. And if you don't have that premium feature in there and people start asking you for it, then bring it in a future version. And so that's where I like to draw the line. And because you're going to have a lot of problems out of the gate. You just want the problems that you want as opposed to the problems you don't want. And so with product market fit, that's one thought that just comes to mind just instinctually as you ask. And then I think the other point I'd make is I'm a real advocate for the empathy until it's painful approach. I think that a lot of teams, I talk about in the book how I don't back teams that are passionate about a problem. Our solution, I back teams that are empathetic with the person suffering the problem. And there's a big difference. The passionate for solving a problem is the majority of Silicon Valley. And then they work behind their screens for 2 years and they wonder why their product was 30 degrees off of what the customer actually needed. And it's because they just lack empathy. And so how do you build a product? I love products that build with like a few enterprise customers that they're in with every single day, or 100 consumers that are using their product, or Periscope, 1,000 consumers, that was it, that were using Periscope. Every week they got a new build through test flight. Every week they got a question from the founders. And they just kept making that better and better and tighter until the metrics were promising, and Twitter bought it. But I think that it's the empathy driven approach. And so every time I get anxious these days, I'm like, just get customers in here. Just spend some more time. Just sit next to them. Just watch them work. Somehow it will just give you the answer. It actually will.
Yeah, I was hoping Kyle would chime in as a fellow investor with his perspective, and I see him in chat. Do you want to add anything or ask your question?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm super curious about this because I have seen this with a number of the products that I've used this year, where like a lot of what you've written and kind of talked about reminds me of Bezos's day one perspective, right? Like trying to maintain that mentality of like, there's always more to do and there's always ways to find ways to improve. But a lot of the products that I have as a user, I find myself adopting that day one mentality where like people will ask me, oh, can the product do X, Y, Z? And I say, no, it doesn't, but I can see it eventually doing that. It's early. I have the vision. I don't care. I'm in it. But that feels like a really difficult thing to like generally attract, help customers see that perspective and sort of help them to adopt a day one mentality as well. And I'm curious if you have any experience of that, of sort of how you help them see that, that day one mentality on their own.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding, it's kind of how do you get customers to buy into a not full-fledged solution yet? How do you get them? I mean, the short answer is it has to do one thing so well that customers are forgiving of everything it doesn't do. I mean, in my life, I could never have imagined that I'd use 2 email apps. Like the idea of having to go to 2 different email apps on my phone and on my desktop is crazy to me. But I found that Superhuman was so effective for everything that was not Exchange supported, because they don't support that yet. You could argue that I would never have used Superhuman if they didn't support Exchange, so I could have everything roll into one. But I do, and I use it because I think it does a few things so much better in half of my email that it's worth the friction. And so I guess, you know, you have to find out what those things are. I do actually think a lot of products out there do a number of things a little bit better, but don't have that one absolute, you know, step function better experience that gets people to be super forgiving. So I don't know. It's really about the merchandising also of the you know, of that one thing, and the promise, you know, of the product over the long term. I have spent some time recently thinking about the features that that drive adoption, even though they don't ever get utilized. Sometimes people get more excited about a product's possibility than its practicality. And so, like, why is it that you know, why is it that we get sort of lured in? I mean, Photoshop, for example, has a lot of features that we've launched every year. But when I actually go into the metrics, many of them are, you know, used only a few percentage of, you know, folks who use it. But our customers want the ability to do certain things that one time a year when they need to do it. And so it's been interesting to see that sort of the hypothetical what you're saying. Like sometimes it's those things in the margins that drive adoption. It's a good question.
Great,
I'll
and
think more about that.
I want to, yeah, thanks for the thoughts there. One, I want to transition to EJ, who's another typical hand raiser in the community here, and she has a really good one about kind of your background and transitions.
Yeah, thanks, DK. I'm really enjoying this talk, Scott. I'm curious because I'm assuming I'm similar to you in that I have no like traditional path to design. Like I've taught design thinking at the D school without like literally knowing how to use Adobe or you know, products. And I consider myself a creative and a designer, yet I've got no like pixel moving chops, if you will. So someone like yourself, I'm assuming, you know, you didn't go to design school. You actually have a background in finance and then went to business school and then built Behance, which is a product for designers. Help me understand like how you made that transition and how you built, how you gained more designerly type mindsets and skills like empathy, right? Recognizing that you don't have to be a designer to be skilled in empathy, but that's a common trait of designers. I just love to better understand that path and transition.
Well, I guess a couple of thoughts. I mean, I was one of those 13-year-olds using Photoshop, you know, on my parents' computer, and I definitely didn't buy it, so I don't know how I got it, but I was definitely using it. In college, you know, I studied environmental science and environmental economics, but then junior year I stumbled upon this major called design and environmental analysis, and then really loaded up on as many classes as I could take there. But I never had a formal design education by any means. I just always had this interest in visual expression and you know, showing just ideas. And so maybe I was always destined to kind of come back to design based on my core interests. And I just never was encouraged to go in that direction or had the opportunity. I don't know what it was, but you know, when you were sharing your question though, I was also thinking about the area of product design, because I'm a product obsessive, and I've now been a part of so many different products, either parts of Behance or the product of Behance itself, or things like the task management tool we launched, or the conference, you know, content website, or, you know, obviously all of Adobe's products and all these startups that I work with as a product advisor. And product, I'm not aware of a formal education in product. You know, I think product is as much psychology as it is design. It's about understanding where the customer is in his or her journey, and, you know, what their insecurity is, what they need to see next to feel like they're making progress. This role of ego analytics, you know, knowing that you're being better as a result of your engagement in a tool, and even understanding how that's not just about, you know, likes on Instagram. It's also about enterprise products. People leverage enterprise products when they feel like it makes them more successful in their work environment, or said more bluntly, when it makes them look good in front of their bosses. And some of the most ingenious features I've seen in enterprise products are things like export an edible version of a report, beautifully designed. And so that I can then export this thing, make it look like it's mine, put my name at the top and hand it around. And people are like, oh my gosh, like, how did you create this report? So I think those insights are really more about people, and about the way that they work. And then but I have so much respect for design. And I have to say, like, the cheat code in my career, if anything, has been the relationships I have with designers. And just amazing designers that are so much more talented than I could ever be, who are great partners and are willing to engage in that, collaboration. And I mean, those are the folks that I probably owe the most to, in anything I've ever done.
I'm curious, actually, how did you assemble those relationships? Because I assume those were a core part of the beginning of Behance, but were those relationships you'd already been establishing before you decided to build the product, or did you establish them as part of that product building process?
Well, it was part. I met Matthias, who became my co-founder at Behance, but really was a freelance designer that I just collaborated with for a year or so before joining full time. And I discovered this new type of chemistry in the world that I didn't know existed, which is sketching out something, outlining, debating, and then reviewing a round design and iterating and adding more and more resolution. And I just stumbled upon this. And so I've tried to replicate that in all areas of my life, personal projects, companies that I work with, and the types of people I invest in, and certainly in my job at Adobe. I mean, the designers that I work with now, some of them are still from Behance. And I've worked with now for more than 10, in some cases, 12, 15 years. So it's, so that's really important to me.
Laura has a good question in chat. You want to ask?
Sure. So I know that, the messy middle can be this up and down roller coaster, but I'm wondering if there's a time where you realize that actually you're not in the messy middle, you're somewhere that is a good stopping place or a transition point. Because it feels like very easy to just keep telling yourself, well, tomorrow's going to be good. And so, we're just stuck in this darker place, or there is a middle, but it's not a middle this way, it's kind of a middle this way, like flat. So yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts there.
Well, the first instinct that comes to mind is really this measure of conviction. And I think that we all it's easy to have very high conviction in an idea before you know any better. And that high is what stimulates us to take a massive risk in our lives and just do something fantastic. And then we learn the real deal as we have more conversations and more time with customers, et cetera. And as you get all that data, I mean, there's a fundamental question we always have to be asking ourselves. Are we gaining from all that more conviction in this end state of the world that we started with, or less? And practically speaking, if it's less, you should always quit and try something else. If what you're now knowing is less, gives you less conviction at end state, why try to make that end state work with these precious years of our life, right? It's hard enough to get it, even if it's a great idea. But if you have as much, if not more, conviction in the end state, then I would remind people that they're just in the messy middle, that they're just in this phase where they just have to keep trying. Maybe you have to be more decisive and wait for a lucky break. Maybe you have to try, to iterate or do a pivot within the same, solution area. I don't know, but that would be what I would go back to as a measure of conviction.
I actually wanted to, Scott, also ask you about, kind of looping back to your answer before this one. You talk a lot about team and kind of hiring in the book. And given that probably a lot of people's skills and experience are just a starting point for what's to come, and given the importance of these different kinds of design thinking and empathy that you just brought up, how do you approach hiring today, and how did you at Behance? Has that changed? And sort of like, what are the actually best signals that you found for someone's potential?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've slowed down on hiring as I've matured, because I've learned that it's very hard to remove someone from a team. And so that whole hire slowly, fire fast mantra has become, really has proved itself to be true to me. But in the early days of Behance, I was hiring anyone who was willing to work for me. and we made some mistakes, but we also got a few really great hires too. So in terms of the things that I look for, the most important thing to me is like clarity in communication, alignment in a vision, genuine enthusiasm, and an initiative in what's interesting to them. I mean, my favorite interview questions is about what people are interested in or were interested in over the course of their lives, and then what they did about it. Some people are like, oh no, I'm just interested, and I just do it sometimes. And some people are like, oh well, I started an organization that did this, and then I joined the society, and then I actually started a newsletter, and I'm a blogger about this. And what you see from that is that this person has a history of taking initiative and what's interesting to them, and that they're likely to continue doing so if you bring them onto your team and they're interested in what you're doing. So, and in the craziness of Silicon Valley and headlines and everyone always chasing heat, there's something incredible about people that are just there because they love the topic. Adobe has a lot of those people who could be hired by any company to bring some of that creative imaging or video magic or whatever to all these. Everyone wants that these days, but they're at Adobe because they want to do it all day, every day with the people that are most committed to that in the world, and they're just they're geeking out all day and they love it. And so I love bringing people and working with people like that, as opposed to the folks who are just trying to be wherever is hot. Because listen, I mean, no one's ever been extraordinarily successful joining something that's already hot. What they have though been successful is joining something that isn't so obvious, which is why I like to say that great opportunities never have great opportunity in the subject line. It's never that clear.
Right. Speaking of kind of the opportunity and the transitions in your career, Max has a question. I wanted to invite Max back up to ask this question around career transitions here.
Yeah. So like when, starting Behance and then moving, to Adobe later, what was like one thing that, really stood out for you when like making that transition?
Well, I mean, everything changes, when you go from a startup to a big company to some degree. But for me, it was really about, is my team going to be able to do more of what we love or less? And there were some things we had to do that we didn't have to do before, like integrate into the identity system of the company. Obviously, suddenly we had to consult legal for saying certain things. I mean, there were some processes put in place, which are probably a good thing if we were planning to grow. But also what we were doing was very aligned with where Adobe was going. And I think that's really important. A lot of, everyone uses the term unicorn for the startup that breaks the $1 billion valuation. I mean, to me, the true unicorn is a acquisition that really, really works, in the sense that the people all stay because they want to stay, and they stay for many years, and they become leaders of the business that acquired them. I mean, that to me is the best in class acquisition. And Adobe was able to achieve that with Behance. And it was, I think, because of how aligned we were and how the chemistries matched, and how the people who worked for me at Behance were never there because we were the darling of Silicon Valley. I mean, we were a New York team that had no real technology background, that was trying to change an industry where there really wasn't much money. So we attracted all the right people for the right reasons, because no one else would join for other reasons. And I think that was really critical to how we were successful and stuck together long enough to figure it out. I mean, we talk about in the book a little bit, we were bootstrapped for 5 years. I mean, that's a long time where you're not sure if you're going to make payroll. Everyone's compromising on salary. And we really had very little attrition at all until we got acquired, even after that. Can't harp that enough. It's really about why they're there. And so that, but you were asking kind of what changes. I think that a lot of the things that you think are a big deal, like not being your own boss anymore or not having that startup culture, you end up realizing that's more of a narrative than anything else. It's not reality. I mean, our culture was what we made it, and I was as empowered as I was willing to be empowered when it came to authority. So Those are a few observations.
I wonder actually I'm curious a little deeper on the path here in the kind of larger corporate executive role, because you have so much experience in the early stage, the startup building, the angel investing, and it's kind of a rare transition to do what you've done, where you've now sort of built kind of a career as an executive. And I wonder, are there aspects of kind of the startup ecosystem and your involvement with it and your spidey sense there that you directly bring and sort of almost like stamp on the team as part of your mark? And what does that look like? Is it hard to convince people to come along in a larger company environment, or do people recognize you as that playing that role within the team, and then they sort of are like more open to it?
Well, I don't think that Adobe would have brought me in at this phase, in this role of chief product officer, if they if the company wasn't excited about a lot of change. And that's what I've been so engaged with, is just changing the way that we build products, changing the nature of these products, changing our innovation pipeline and how bold we are in that area. And I think a lot of the tendencies in startups around, the lean way of building, the ability to try something without having get the whole company in line. For example, when you're launching something and you're trying something out, do you need to get the commerce team to put that in their roadmap and wait a year to get it delivered, or can you just use Stripe and just give it a shot? And if this becomes a real material thing, we'll get it done. We'll bring it into the commerce system of the company. I think those those perspectives, not just for me, but others, in my team who came from startups, that's super helpful, because big companies going through change need to start thinking small again. Like, that's how they change. Otherwise, they'll just be big old incumbents and, trip over themselves. So it's been fun. And I went into this in 2012 thinking, gosh, I'm not sure I'm going to be a big company person, and we'll give this a shot, but I'm not sure I'll be around for a long time. I ended up realizing I loved it. I love the teams, I love the products, I love customers, most importantly. And it was fun to be a little disruptive.
And I guess in the startup ecosystem today, there are a lot of, there's a lot of action and movement around creative tools, and you sort of have, a very large customer base, large revenue system that you're serving. So, but I'm sure you're like intimately familiar with a lot of the new tools that are coming up, kind of the upstarts. And I wonder, do you think about sort of evolving kind of the existing set of at-scale tools to serve some of these better? Do you think about new product lines that you would launch, maybe not even under the Adobe brand, but some way to kind of trial balloon some of these ideas you're talking about? You just throw on Stripe and don't put it in the commerce catalog and just kind of run hard at it.
Right. No, first of all, it's really exciting to see innovation in the creative industry and in this space of tools, because there hasn't been so much, or not as much as there should be. And it's great for the customers. It keeps the industry moving forward. It keeps us on our toes. So net, it's awesome. And a lot of my friends are these founders. For us, we have a responsibility to our loyal long-term customers to help bring them into new mediums. Adobe is really good at this. We had people who are graphic designers who had to adopt web, and we helped them get there. And then they were doing web and they had to adopt this thing called mobile, and we helped them get there. And there were new tools and new ways of working. And we saw it on it was our opportunity and responsibility to help people make that leap. And so now customers are going through a few different major transitions. Number one is they're becoming more collaborative during the creative process itself. And so we need to make our products not only collaborative, but collaborative by default. Everything you're doing, you should be defining which team you're part of and who you're working with, maybe even before you lay a pixel on a page. So I think there's that aspect that we're trying to help customers, and that we have a lot of work to do in our products to get there. But we have cloud documents already in Photoshop and Adobe XD and now Illustrator. We have these products working across different devices using the same cloud document in the sky. Some of those things are major advancements for us. We also have a responsibility to help creatives succeed in new mediums. Like augmented reality, you could argue, is the next web to mobile, right? Like web to mobile to AR. I think we're all going to be walking around with glasses on. I think we're going to be telling our grandchildren what screens were. And they're going to be like, you what? You bought these big, clunky, expensive things and you did what with them? You put them on the wall? Like, why would you do that? It's like the cassette tape. It's just not going to, they're not going to exist anymore because everything is going to be high definition with depth and perception and all around us exactly the way we want it to be. If we want to watch a screen that's thousands of feet wide, we'll just audio announce it. So I think that's, we have that opportunity. And that's actually an area where I think Adobe is uniquely positioned because we have all the products people are already using. And the last thing I'll say about this is that a new medium like augmented reality will be a complete failure if it's not filled with rich, interactive, exciting content.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know DK will probably wrap soon, but I did really want to get this one question in about your decision-making process. You mentioned this a little bit when we chatted before this call, but we had Andy Duke on recently. Everyone's thinking about decision-making and uncertainty these days. How have you been thinking about improving your decision-making process recently? What does that iteration look like for you?
Well, I think decision-making for me these days is really about an iterative process of reviewing something and discussing it with the same or different groups of people, but over and over and over until it's obvious. I mean, at first, any idea sounds crazy to people that haven't heard it before, and they may react in one way that isn't really good data in terms of whether, what decision to make. But as you really outline and do prototypes and show rather than tell and really get a group of people aligned, then other questions come up and then you do it again and then fewer questions come up and then again. And then before you know it, people are like, well, why are we having this meeting? Of course we should do this. And that's really where you want to get when you're doing a big change in a big organization. So for big decisions, I like to do that. But of course, I also, practice what I preach on the decisiveness piece. Like I really do try to have an increased frequency and durability of decisions. So make a decision quickly and allowing a team to move forward. Don't pull back on that decision. Let them really learn from it and then debrief and iterate.
That's great.
But good question. And thank you all. Like, I just love this community of, it's great for someone like me as an author. I don't really get to have, as many, I do, speeches and stuff, but not like a conversation of questions on edges that I hadn't thought of as much. So just thanks all of you for taking the time to read the book and ask questions. It really means a lot to me.
Thank you, Scott. We know you've had like a really busy season here and product launches coming up. So we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. We will move towards closing the session now, except we do have one final question that we like to ask our guests. So we will be asking that in a moment, but first I just want to make a quick announcement. So of course, thank you, Scott, as I mentioned, and thanks to everybody else who attended and asked questions today. We really get a lot more value, as Scott mentioned, by having all of the kind of creative juices flowing and different questions, different perspectives coming to mind. For our we typically at this point like to announce some of our upcoming town halls. But we actually have a special announcement that we'd like to share with the community here today. We've had a blast running these town halls through Zoom over the past year, and we've discovered some needs we have as showrunners that require a more custom live video experience. So we've been hard at work building the tool to help us run these more effectively, and we're beginning to invite some trusted testers to beta the new tool with us. So anybody who's here today, if you're interested to participate in the beta, do feel free to DM us, and we'll post the link to our Twitter, and you can DM us and we'll send you a link and kind of show you the new product. We'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts as we get that going. And then that'll be sort of the new system we use in the future when we have subsequent discussions with authors and other people. So now we'll conclude with the questions. So, we've spent the whole hour here asking you our questions. Now I want to turn the tables and hear kind of your questions, whether that's your questions for us as readers of your work, or your questions broadly for the world. What's top of mind for you? It could be flippant, could be philosophical, but where is your head? What are the big questions that you're asking these days?
Well, I think that one of my big questions is really, I'm actually curious, what new what new technology or practice, whether it's in your work or in your life or in your health, is your greatest leg up and what you want to do? You know, we all have something that has done something miraculous for each of us. I'm always curious, like, what is that for others? What is that for you?
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll start a Twitter thread to ask people to chime in with answers to that. So with that, we'll close the session. Thanks again so much, Scott, and to everybody else.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day, everyone.